What a time in the NBA. All-star voting is here. Debates are running wild. Trade season has started. The Pacers are playing physical opponents. Daniel Theis is apparently returning to the court tomorrow and could be easing his way back in. There's so much to get to in Pacerland and the league, and we'll get to it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, the last pre-Christmas Locked On Pacers of 2022. So much to get to. It's a very fun time in the NBA calendar to be an NBA fan because the games are good. Teams have figured out who they are. No one is tanktacular yet, and the trade season discussions have seeped into the NBA. The all-star voting has started this week, so there's a lot of merit-based discussions about players. There's just a lot to talk about in the league, and we're getting to it all today with frequent guests, probably the most frequent guest, second most frequent guest here on Locked On Pacers, formerly from 8.9 Seconds, now with Sports Ethos. It's Rhett Bauer. Rhett, thank you, one, for the time, and being available during Christmas week. I feel so bad asking people for their time during this week.
Well, it's funny because I said it was like, oh man, you got 3 kids, all that stuff. I was like, no, we didn't do anything. I am more than happy to lock that door over there and come on to here to talk about some Pacers basketball. So thank you for having me back again.
You and Derek I have on all the time, and I'm always like, dang, the two people I like talking to the most have kids. Like, I feel bad, like, stealing 30 minutes of their day ever. But today, a lot of fun stuff. We're talking all-star stuff. Haliburton's name's been attached to that for a while. We'll talk all the Pacers candidacies to the extent that they even exist in the East. We've got a list of guys that I think are in the mix in the East, and we'll talk Haliburton's case against them. We'll talk about a question I've been getting a lot, right? Should the Pacers' surprising start influence how they act in trade discussions this year? I talked about it a little bit on the mailbag, but we can get more nuance today. And if we have time, talk maybe about the Heat tonight and about Daniel Theis, who apparently is returning to the court tomorrow for practicing. That's basically the entire update, but hey, we'll get to that. I let Rhett choose between All-Stars and Trade Talk where we're going first, and we chose All-Star Talk for today. Obviously, Haliburton's name has been attached to the All-Star phrasing this week for some good reasons, like having 33 points and 8 assists against the Boston Celtics in a road win over the reigning Eastern Conference champions, and some for reasons that are weird, like a former NBA player and current MSG analyst calling him a wannabe fake all-star. Rhett, easy lob here. Should he be in the mix? How close do you feel like Haliburton is? Because when I was coming up with names for East All-Stars, I got to about 16, and it's a 12-team field.
Yeah, I think Haliburton is probably closer to being an all-star starter than he is to not making the team. I think that's where I'm at with him. And I think a lot of the starter criteria, or like who's actually going to make it, is going to come down to team record. And with the Pacers slide, there's probably not, it's not looking great for him to make that point. But I think there's no argument at all that Haliburton is an all-star this year.
Yeah, I think I share that opinion. And remember how important record is. Go back 2 years when the Pacers were clinging to top 4 in the Bjorkgren season, and they were about 1 game ahead of 9th. And then on the Monday of a random week, Kevin Durant gets injured, and it's announced he's out through the All-Star break. And so the Pacers lose that Monday night, and then Adam Silver has to make a decision for the replacement, and the Pacers are now a half game ahead of 9th, but they're in 4th. That's how tight the East was. And so Wednesday in the middle of the day, they announced that it's Sabonis is the replacement. And then the Pacers lose that night, and now they're in 9th. And all of a sudden, it's like, does the 9th-ranked team deserve an all-star this year? Like, it really mattered for them that they were so high in the East. This year's a little different because outside of Toronto, even a big Pacers skid can't really knock them out of the play-in. Like, the East is just not great from the bottom 5. So they can fall a little, and I think they likely will. Their schedule is kind of tough. But I don't think they can even fall so much that it would drastically change. But I do think it could matter for starter versus bench versus wild card, whatever. The positions are dumb. The thing about the East that's really tough this year is, like, there's a lot of guys who I would probably put like 80% or more that they're going to be all-stars this year. But because the field is so tight, I only have 4 players that I'm like, yeah, you're a 5 players that I'm like, yeah, you're an all-star. Like, you're a lock to make it this year, right? Embiid, duh. Tatum, duh. Giannis, duh. Donovan Mitchell, duh. And for some reason, I clicked off of the tab. Kevin Durant, duh. Like, there are a lot of other guys besides those 5 that I'm like, yeah, you should be to me. But those are the only 5 that I think for sure, no doubt, right this second, put him in. Everybody else, it's kind of not as obvious of a case. And I think that helps Haliburton, who has been really consistent this year, is 1 total point. This makes me so mad. 299 points in 30 games. 1 total point away from being a 20 and 10.5 guy. Everybody who averaged more than 8.5 assists last year was an all-star. Like, his case is fantastic. Pacers offense literally is him. Like, it's six points per 100 possessions better when he's out there. Like, his case is fantastic, but there's a lot of guys who have really good cases. So it makes it tough in the East this year when there's very few locks, but a lot of guys in the mix.
I think Siakam is also a lock for me.
He's the highest guy I didn't put a lock in there because he missed a lot of time. Not a lot.
He did miss a lot of time. I think that, like, obviously as you get further and further away from him missing that time, that starts to matter less. And I think as Toronto gets better, because I do think that they will get better, he'll be up there as a lock. But yeah, the weirdest part to me is you've got, just like from the guards themselves, I've got a list of 10 guys right here outside of Mitchell, who was a lock, I agree there, that are all like kind of in the same boat. Jaylen Brown, Trae Young, Kyrie, DeMar, Harden, Brunson, Hallie, Drew, because the Bucks are so good. And then DeJounte.
You still missed one. Wow.
LaVine?
Darius Garland.
Oh, Garland. I was sorting my points per game, and I hadn't gotten to Garland yet.
The East guard group is good.
Yes, exactly. And so that's just kind of the weird thing about it. I think Haliburton being the only all-star candidate on the Pacers actually helps him as well, because you get into like, okay, well, the Cavs have Mitchell. Do they get 2 all-stars if they're in 4th or 5th? Yeah. You know, like those arguments is just, you're splitting hairs, and that's just kind of how it works. But I think Haliburton gets it, but it also, as we get closer to it, it wouldn't be surprised if he didn't, if some of these teams keep stacking up wins and playing as well as they are.
If they are within 5 games of 500, I think he'll get it. But I think he'll be a wild card guy just because of the standings. I think that is going to be tough for him. Like, if we get there and the Raptors are surging, I agree with you. Pascal is in. We didn't even talk about front court dudes like Jimmy Butler and Bam. Like, one of them will for sure be in the Heat. Look actually like competent again. So they might get 2. Like, those 2 are, of course, fantastic players. Like, Julius Randle is suddenly very good again. You know, like, there's a lot of guys in the mix, and I'm sure I'm missing someone that's going to make me embarrassed when someone comes back and listens to this. Like, Banchero is he in the mix? Like,
I guess if Orlando keeps winning, yeah.
I don't think he'll make it. But, you know, the East actually is a talented, crowded group this year. And I, again, think Haliburton's above a lot of names we've already said. But it's not like fait accompli. He's going to make it this year. I would put his odds in the 70% right now, probably, just because, again, like a surge from any of these teams in the Bulls, Raptors area would really help those cases. And there's a lot of guys that are right on the fringe that could surge and play really well. So I wouldn't say it's fait accompli, but I do think he's got a very good chance. And the Pacers consistently have all-stars, right? Last year was their first time since 2015 without having one, and that was the PG injury year. Before that, you have to go back to, I think it was Hibbert in 2010, but that was the last year they didn't have one, which has a 9, right? Granger was, then the Gap, and then they always had one. So it's been a while, and Haliburton's got a great shot. If they keep winning, I think he'll have a fantastic case.
Yeah, absolutely. In my defense for missing Garland, he's smack dab between Terry Rozier, Kelly Oubre, and Bojan Bogdanovic in points per game, which is what I sorted by from the All-Star voting. So I just kind of skipped right over that section. But no, I think the Pacers just being in the mix for play-in / flirting with that 6th spot is definitely going to be all that it really takes for Haliburton to stay in the, I don't want to say a lock because it's not really, but he's definitely in that wild card mix ahead of a lot of these other guys who might have the all-star pedigree. Like, historically they've been all-stars, but they just haven't been very good this year. Especially with so many of these teams. Like, it is so compact in the middle that it could be a similar situation to how Sabonis got his second All-Star game, where it's like, all right, you're the 4 seed. Actually, no, you're the 8 seed. And, oh, wait, no, now you're the 10 seed. And so it's kind of hard to say right now. I just hope he stays healthy, and that should be all it takes.
Yeah, and there's, like, every year, one of these guys could get hurt in the next 2 months. 1 month? I guess it gets announced in late January. Which always is awful, but a factor involved. The Pacers have other players. I don't think any of them have great all-star candidacies. Matherin was balling in terms of scoring early in the season. He's now down, I say with air quotes, like that's a bad thing, to 17.5 points per game, clearly adjusting to the way he's being covered. Look, he's fantastic at getting to the rim and shooting, and he doesn't have enough playmaking or defense to be an all-star yet. That's not a knock on him. He will definitely be an all-star at some point in his career. He's not yet. Buddy Hield, one of the best shooters in the NBA. There is an event at the All-Star weekend that he should be involved in. It's not the All-Star game. It's the three-point contest. And then Miles Turner, one of the top, impact stats today. He's a top 50 player this year, but like 27th in the East in BPM and 20, I forget what in EPM. I was looking this morning. He was awesome in mid-November when the Pacers were rolling, and he's had a couple rough games in a row this week. His rebounding has kind of dipped this month, and by kind of, I mean kind of significantly, and especially in the clutch. So as good as his best was this season, he's had some a rough patch sounds bad because he's still playing fine, I think. I don't know. He had a decent stretch when he came back from that injury in Golden State, but the last 3 games specifically have been a little rougher for him, and I think there's no chance he's an all-star. But he's the best non-Haliburton case, so I gave him the most airtime, I guess.
That's exactly right. And there was a case when Miles was averaging 20 and 10 early in the season, which, not to say we knew was unsustainable, but it was kind of unsustainable. We did know. And so it's also fine that the Pacers only have one all-star candidate right now, right? Like 100%. You said it, Matherin is going to get there. Like the way that he scores the ball and the way that this team likes to run and gun, like that's an exciting player to have in an all-star game eventually. I'm just upset you didn't have Buddy Hield in the dunk contest rather than the three-point contest.
Yeah, no dunk contest. Who would be the best Pacers dunk contest guy?
Probably Matherin.
Matherin or Brissett, I think, would be the two. They have a lot of athletes this year, man. I mean,
it's so great.
Can they get Kendall Brown in the dunk contest somehow?
He has played an NBA game, so I don't know what the requirement are.
To be in the dunk contest. Yeah. Look, no one has a shot at Haliburton. Like you could spin the numbers for Hield, Turner, whatever, but it's not. They're not all stars. Like they're just not. Especially because they've both kind of been worse this month than they were earlier this season. Like you got to be a dude almost all the time to be an all-star, and Haliburton has been that outside of that one Heat game, and no one else has on this team. A quick message from the National Highway Traffic Safety Association. Did you know that driving high is considered driving under the influence? That's right. Driving under the influence of marijuana is against the law in every state, even states where marijuana is illegal. That means driving high could get you a DUI. And if you think that law enforcement officers can't tell when you're driving high, you're wrong. Your friends can tell, your coworkers can tell, even your parents can tell, everyone can tell. So what makes you think that law enforcement officers don't know when you're driving high? Driving under the influence of marijuana can slow down your response time and change how you perceive time and speed. So even if you think you're fine to drive when you're high, you're not, because the bottom line is if you feel different, you drive different, and driving high is driving under the influence. So remember, drive high, get a DUI, paid for by the NHTSA. Thanks, everybody, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, hop on over to Locked On Heat, Pacers opponent tonight, and they are playing some good effing basketball right now. The Heat, after struggling for forever, are finally looking capable and competent and back in the playoff picture. All it took was an 87-82 win over the Pacers to get your confidence back. How about that? Trade talk time. I have rules for Rhett. I laid them out before. We will not be saying a single player's name who is not on the Pacers in this segment. I got this question a lot, and I wanted to talk about it with someone else instead of just echo chambering myself in a mailbag, which was, does the Pacers start, right? They're 16-16. Nobody had them at 500 through 32 games. Nobody. I think I had them at, I should have pulled this up before I started talking, but about 11 wins through this point when I did the preseason, go through every game podcast. They're surprising. They're good. They have a good player, and the great player in Tyrese Haliburton. They have other good players, right? And so everybody's asking, should that impact their direction at the deadline, right? Should they, the thought was they'll be sellers to the extent that word is even relevant here. Now, if they're good, should they, add upgrades? And I said, no. The Pacers all offseason said, we're taking longer term approaches to team building now. This is a new era. Their best two players are 22 and 20. I don't think their start should impact their trade deadline approach. That said, I want to amend that because I've been thinking about it since. I think that if they target other players in trades, names notwithstanding, they would have gone for younger players. I do think that the change I would make to my goals as the Pacers at the deadline is I'd be more open to guys who are already good or will be good sooner than maybe longer term project sort of trades, if that makes any sense. Like picks, short term picks don't make a ton of sense, but like if you can get a guy who will be really good for you even next year, like they could be pushing for that next year, maybe you do that. Whereas before the season, I said, no, that doesn't make sense. They need to be thinking, 3 years from now. But now I think they're allowed to, and with great reason, go for guys who maybe make them good even next year, or fine, I guess this year too, but it's hard to pick a guy who's going to be good next year but isn't good now. But you get what I'm saying. Like they're allowed to be pushing the timeline forward with trades more in a way that I don't think I would have considered before the season. That is my alteration, to what I said. But I still think that sticking with what they said before the season, when your two best players are under 23, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Are you going out and throwing your name in the superstar sweepstakes?
No.
Probably not. No. Like you're anybody over 30, you're probably not buying them with the assets that you have. Like you're not giving up picks, you're not giving up IJAX, you're like anything like that. You're not doing those types of moves. However, if you're giving up you've got 3 picks in the 2023 draft. You're not using all 3 of those picks. If you give up 2 of them and you go get a cost-controlled player who's under 27, who's good and plays a position of need, aka forward, yes, you should be a buyer. Like you should go do that as long as it makes sense. Yeah. Like if that opportunity is out there and it makes sense with the direction that you want to go, then yes, I think you should be considering the fit with Haliburton and Mathurin, and I guess Nembhard could kind of be thrown in there. But I think the hard part about it is not being sure what your center rotation is going to be, because I think that changes a lot of what you might need from that 4 spot for sure, but probably the 3 as well, unless you think that like Duarte or Nembhard is the starting 3 for the Pacers when they're good, which maybe, but also maybe not.
Yeah, and the center thing's funny too, because like you can't possibly think this way as an NBA team, but like you could get a good center, and then if you win the lottery just on dumb luck, it's like, well, we don't need this guy anymore.
Shoot,
I just don't. You can't think that way, but
no, definitely not.
It's a very odd situation that they're in, and I get why the question exists. Like if you look at the standings, I think they're tied for 8th with Atlanta right now. Like they're both 16-16, right? Like that's a playoff, air quotes, team. The play-in tournament exists. You have some numbers that you can share in a moment about their first 16 games versus their last 16 games, but they're still in that mix. I get why people are thinking about their situation now, but the other factor for everyone to consider in this discussion is the trade deadline's not for a month and a half, right? And I think for them, I said this when I did like a general trade deadline overview, because they have so much cap space, not because they can go both directions, but because like I guess teams consider that they could go both directions. That means that their flexibility and options are strong and valuable. And it makes sense if you're in that situation where you have all this flexibility, where if you make a trade early, you lose a lot of that. That makes less sense. So they're going to be one of the teams that, to me, operates later on in this process. And so their situation now is less relevant than whatever they are on January 20th, February 1st, whatever date you imaginarily pick in your head. I just named 2. Like that is more important. So yeah, they're 16-16 now, but if they're, this is made up, but like if they're 28-18 on January 20th, yeah, okay, you change your tune. And if they're 18-28 on January 20th, guess what? You also change your tune, right? Like, yes, the start matters in this discussion, which is why I amended what I said, but I also think more time is required for a team that should be patient to make moves. We need more time to assess that question.
Exactly. And I think that the only reason that I would consider being more aggressive than what we entered the season is because of the huge benefit of having Haliburton on his rookie deal still.
Yes.
Like you have a flexibility right now that is the biggest advantage in professional sports, where your best player is on a rookie deal that is going to go up by about 30 million here in a couple of years.
Yeah.
Like that is just insane. But at the same time, we were just talking about this before we started recording. If you try to accelerate the timeline too fast, you shoot yourself in the foot and you end up like Minnesota, where you trade all of your future assets for a terrible fit because you think it's going to help you win some extra games. Or you do what Atlanta did. You go out, get DeJounte Murray, and it doesn't exactly work, and you might actually end up going backwards without all of those future facing assets that you thought was going to take you in the next step. So I think KP and company, they're not going to rush things. Like, I don't think they would be preaching all offseason, long-term, and then be like, hey, look, we got a bunch of 30-year-olds. Like, now we're going to go for it again because of a 30-game sample size. But I do think this next month of games is going to be pretty rough in terms of establishing which direction you might want to go. Because if you think you're buying right now, the next 15 games or so is going to change the tune quite a bit, I would think.
Yeah, they just shouldn't be, unless they're like, again, like freaking awesome for the next 40 days or something. Like, they should not be buyers. They just shouldn't be. And you bring up a good point about Haliburton. Like right this second, what does he make? 4 something, 5 something? Like, right this second, he's a $30 million player, right? Like, that's $25 million of extra room that you shouldn't have. Mathurin is probably $20 million player right now. I don't know what he is. But he will be a $30-40 million guy. He's making $6 million right now, right? Like, those are huge gaps that really help you team build. Like, getting Steph Curry and Clay cheap at the same time allowed the Warriors to get all these good dudes at the same time.
Yep.
Like, that really matters. And so, yes, I agree with you that. And that's why I've long thought that their next year trade deadline, 2024, is like the most important for the Pacers in a while. But that's a next year discussion. But that's all super important stuff, too, to note, is like, that flexibility is going to matter, but it will run out at some point. Like, they will not have time to use it forever. So if you can be aggressive with your space and get something awesome, you should do that. And yeah, the other team we were talking about with the timeline stuff is the Hawks, right? Something I always used to tell Adam in team building stuff is, the order matters. You have to crawl, you have to walk, you have to run in order. You can't crawl and then run immediately because you don't know how to run. That's how you become the Hawks, right? They inexplicably make the conference finals. And don't get me wrong, they were good in the playoffs that year, but no one believed they were a top 2 team in the East or a top 5 team in the league at that point. And then they go try to chase all these upgrades while also ducking the tax for some reason. And now,
love that.
Yeah, none of that stuff made sense. It was too early, right? They needed to continue to develop their young guys for probably one more year before they went for it. But instead, they ended up trading away some of those young dudes. They have a poor fitting team now. They're 500, right? Like, that did not help them, right? That happens all the time. All the time. Teams think they're so tantalizingly close to being better than they really are. You have to be careful about going through the entire process. If the move is right and you believe it, do it, sure. But it is important to see through your processes and things like that.
Look at what the Grizzlies have done.
Yeah,
they are the perfect example of crawl, walk, run. Yes. Because this is like the 3rd season in a row that they technically could have pushed their chips in, and it would have been exactly what Atlanta and Minnesota did. Like, they have made trades to get worse because they believed in their internal development and then stacked assets on top of that. And they were right in both cases. And now they have even more assets in the cupboard to chase the next piece that makes sense for their team now that they know what their team is going to look like. And I think that's the biggest thing for me with this Pacers team is how many players on this roster right now can we say for sure? Like, how many starters do we have on the next good Pacers team that you can say for sure? 2. Exactly. That is 40% of your lineup. And of course, you have a bunch of rotation players like Duarte and Nembhard. Like, Jalen Smith, probably a rotation player if the team's good and off the bench. Ijax probably gets there. But, like, you don't have your core yet. You really don't. And buying without knowing what your core is going to look like, especially with what's hopefully another really good draft pick coming up, it can be dangerous depending on what the kind of player is that you're buying. And that's why you can't really say for sure, should they be buying or selling? I don't know. What player is it? Like, we're not naming names for a reason, but like, what is the deal? And then I'll tell you whether or not they should buy or sell.
Rhett Bauer, Neesmith hater. That's what I just heard when you were naming potential core players. I want to continue to talk about the Grizzlies, actually. This episode brought to you by BetOnline.net, your number one source for sports betting info, news, and analysis, plus stats. And you can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and the World Cup. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. They've got their NFL lines up for this week. Tomorrow, some Saturday night Christmas Eve football. For example, the Chiefs favored by 10 over the Seahawks. The Titans and Texans play in a game in the Colts division. Titans favored by 3 points there. All those lines and more at BetOnline.net. The fastest and easiest way to get all your sports betting info. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more, because BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you, everybody, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Check out Locked On Sports today for your second listen. Go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes for the biggest stories in sports from the local experts here at the Locked On Podcast Network, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Look, the Grizzlies have been so patient, and like they had reason to go run this year, right? They made the conference semis last year. They played the Warriors better than any team in the league in the playoffs last year. Like, Ja got hurt in that series, and they still got to 6, right? They could very easily have said, we walked a couple years. We know Ja's great. We know Jaren Jackson's great. We know Bane's great. We have all these good players still coming up in our system. They could have easily run this year, and they're still like, no. We had a plan. We're sticking to it. We still have some of these dudes on rookie deals where it's cheap. Like, let's stick the course for another year. And next year, I bet by the 2024 trade deadline, I bet the Grizzlies make some huge consolidation move where they trade a bunch of their young guys for something awesome that really fits with Job, JJJ Bane, whoever. They're so good they could do a million things. And they're going to be a powerhouse for a long time because they did a great job of sticking with their timeline, right? And that's hard. It's hard to do that, right? You have to have a lot of buy-in from a lot of people. The Bucks really did it too, right? They didn't cash in on Drew for a long time. They made the conference finals or the conference semis, I think, twice before they decided to make that upgrade, right? Like, that really matters in your team building process. The Raptors with Kawhi, right? Obviously, they were running for a while, but the timing of all your moves really
they were
matters,
stumbling for a while.
Yes, they were. LeBron was kind of ruining their running for a little bit in the mid 2010s, but you get the picture we're painting, and that's it. The Pacers, sure, their timeline can slightly change in the future, but this year they are still in the crawling stage to me, and you can start walking next year now. I don't think that was a consideration before the season, but I don't think they can start walking in February. This sounds all ridiculous because I keep using the same analogy, but I hope I am stressing the point enough about what I think they should be doing.
I think it makes sense, and I think it's honestly a good thing that people are asking these questions because it means that we are very excited about the future of the team.
That's true.
And I think at one point it would be like, okay, we're less excited now because they did it, and oh no, there's no allure to what the team's going to be, and if we were wrong to expect so much. But I just don't. It's all going to depend on the moves. Like last trade deadline, when we were talking about should they move Miles or Sabonis, it's like, well, I don't know, what's the deal going to be? It's like, hey, turns out they should have moved Sabonis because they got Haliburton. Yeah. Like, and if you're going to move Miles, you're going to get what? I don't know. I'm not even going to try to make up a fake Miles trade from last year. But yeah, I mean, it's a good position to be in with so much flexibility. And I think we should be excited about that. I know some people will message me and they're like, I'm so annoyed. Like, I just want something to happen because I want to know what direction we're going in. And I get that impatience for sure. But we're also 30 games into this team as currently constructed with a lot of pieces that we aren't even sure about. You said I'm a Nesmith hater. 2 weeks ago, I would have been correct because Nesmith wasn't doing very good. It just so happens that he's really stepped it up late. Yeah, it's fine. So yeah, like I said, there's 2 for sure starters on the next great Pacers team. And until you kind of have a better feel for what the other pieces are going to be, you can't really do anything too drastic.
Can you hammer home our point about patience with your 16-game split stats that you were telling me about? You were muted, sir. Rookie mistake.
First 16 games of the season, when the Pacers went 10-6, they played a bunch of teams that had a combined, like an average winning percentage of 44%. And if you look at that, like if you transpose that over to the current standings in the NBA, that is a team who would not be in the play-in the West and would be the 10th seed in the East right now. So not good. A bunch of Wizards and Charlotte and 2 Magic games without 3 of their 4 best players. So like, sure, you beat, Detroit, exactly. You beat the teams you were supposed to beat, but they just weren't good. Since then, and I tweeted it out, Zach Lowe did a podcast talking about the Pacers, how they were overachieving. And I was like, this is the time of year when we get a Pacers podcast about how they're doing well, and they'll immediately start pooping all over themselves. And that's kind of what happened. They've been 6-10. They have a 38 win percent, which is worse than all but 5 teams in the league just about. In those last 16 games, they've played teams that have an average winning percentage of 54%, which is good for about the 7 seed in both conferences. So a drastic difference in competition, which we kind of knew, like looking at the schedule, it's like, man, these teams aren't very good, but we're winning. That's great. This stretch we just went through was a lot of teams who are good. They're kind of like a lot of these teams were kind of floundering, like Lakers, Nets without any of their guys. Warriors were missing Wiggins a bunch. Like there's just a lot of teams that were missing guys, but we still ended up losing a lot of those games. And the next 16 games are going to be probably worse than the last 16, I would say, because you've got Heat, Pelicans, Cavs, Clippers, Sixers, Blazers, Knicks, Grizzlies, Bucks, Nuggets, Suns, with like OKC and the Hawks sprinkled in there twice. Like that's a lot of teams that you can say like you for sure have maybe 3 wins like you're confident about of the next 15 games, and that is just not exactly where you want to be. So temper the expectations. Let's just enjoy the ride and hope that the team can work on some of the issues that have plagued them the last half of the season and just move forward and learn. That's all that I can say.
That is why the next month matters so much in their direction. If that's the wrong word, I think they know their direction, but in their actual planning and decisions at the deadline, right? Like that, they definitely had a soft schedule early. I think they knew that. Then they had an insane road trip followed by tough opponents, followed by a little tiny gap right now, and then even tougher opponents. Like it's brutal.
Oh, and those 16 games are leading up to the deadline for All-Star voting. So that's why I cut it off there, because those 16 games are very relevant to the All-Star voting that we talked about in the first segment.
Yeah, they still haven't won 2 in a row in a month, so we'll see if that can change. I mean, they got a shot. They beat the Heat once already. Like, I think they can do it, but the Heat are playing very well. 87-82 yuck fest last time these teams played. Although they both teams were like, that was awesome. Like, playoff atmosphere. I love possessions and stuff like that. Like, really? Like, I guess a lot of people are used to that style of basketball. And like, I like low scoring games. Don't get me wrong. But that one specifically, especially because the fourth quarter was like 30 something total points. I was like, this is awful. Like that was a boring fourth quarter to me. Usually I like those kind of games. I did not like that one.
There's low scoring games and then there's bad games.
Yes.
And that was a bad game. That was not just like, oh wow, what great defense. Like, nope, those teams were just really struggling.
Yeah, I did not. We'll see what happens in this one. They played the Heat twice. I don't want to belabor that too much. Do you have any opinion or thoughts on Daniel Theis did media in Boston, which was cool that he was able to do that as a returning player, and he talked about how he's returning to the court Friday for some practice stuff. His surgery was mid-November, early November. Man, I need to catch up on my Daniel Theis timelines. Either way, we'll be ramping up activity, which, look, I don't expect Daniel Theis to even be in the rotation if he's healthy for the Pacers, but there is that whole trade deadline thing we just spent like 20 minutes talking about that. I guess him being healthy could be relevant for.
Yeah, he got surgery mid-November, so it's about a month and a half. I was not expecting him to be available for the Pacers, like even if he is healthy, just not necessarily.
I guess I don't know.
Well, yeah, true. It's a good thing because Daniel Theis has been an important part of teams that have been good, and that is it's a good thing to have a player who is valuable to contending teams as you approach the trade deadline, especially when he's one of the highest salaries on the team, which is very important to just not have dead salary as you're hoping to make some moves one direction or another. So it's just another guy to get off the injury report and have some more options in the front court that can maybe give you a slightly different look depending on what you're going for with certain lineups.
Yeah, another practice body is always valuable, as well as McConnell showed last year. Even when he was out, he was a key guy for this team in those settings, and Theis is a good bat, knows Aaron pretty well. So that's all good stuff. The way I always put it with this, even with guys who never play, it's like it's preferable to have them than to not. And that is obviously good news, even if you might not have a long-lasting on-the-court impact for the Pacers. That's all for today. I thought this was all fun stuff. Like the way the calendar worked out this year was pretty cool, especially because the Pacers are 16-16 and are coming off of probably their best win of the season. Next Monday, I'll put on my Santa hat for the Christmas show, talking about what happened in Pacers Heat, previewing some Pacers Pelicans, and sprinkling in whatever other topic I deem noteworthy from this weekend of Pacers basketball. You won't want to miss that. Rhett, thank you for the time. Where can people follow you and your bomb takes about the Indiana Pacers?
You can find me on Twitter at Rhett_Bauer and all of my wannabe basketball content. I am a wannabe basketball content producer, as we're very familiar with that phrase as of recently. But no, thank you again for having me on.
The vernacular I never thought I'd be accustomed to this week has become that word. I thought it was just from the Spice Girls song, right? That's the only time I think I'd heard it consistently prior to this week. Thank you all so much for listening. This is the last show before Christmas, so everybody have a safe holiday. If you're anywhere, I guess travel is very dangerous right now. If you can, and have a great time with your family, be safe. We'll be back Monday. Pacers will be back in the future. For now, enjoy time with your family. We'll be here when time is up. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you soon.